The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
Well, if Kyle Finnegan is going to be traded before today's 6 o'clock deadline, he didn't exactly make himself attractive to other teams last night in Arizona, where he not only blew a 4-1 lead in the ninth inning, he imploded a 4-run lead, and it finally ended with Corbin Carroll's pinch hit 2-run walk-off home run as the Nationals lost the game 9-8. They had an 8-2 lead in the seventh inning, a 98.9% chance of winning the game, and they lost the game. But we'll see what happens before the deadline today. Also, lots of yak from training camp for the Commanders, the quarterback salaries, a whole lot of things to get into today. But first, an announcement. And this is my 47th year in radio. It's a little bit more than halfway through my 47th year. The goal is 50. We will see, because the one thing I've learned in my 47 plus years of radio is the only thing that's constant is change. There is always change. Unless you have a wildly successful show, at some point it's going to get moved, or unfortunately, I've found out a number of times, you get canceled. And you get, as Dick Vitale says, the ziggy. None of that has happened here, but we are making changes in the lineup here on ESPN 630. Now, my show is going to stay the same. I am in this spot, 9 to 11. I'm very happy here. I enjoy doing this. And more people listen to it on the podcast, so it doesn't really matter what time it's on the air. But if you're out and about and you're still old school, driving around, listening to the radio, we're on 9 to 11 every day. And if, things break while the show is going on, we're able to pass those things along. I really enjoy doing live radio. I've done it all these years. I've done it with one partner, with two partners, with a board op and a producer. I'm a one-man band here, and I'm fine with it. I enjoy it, and I get to play highlights of other shows like the Dan Patrick Show and the Rich Eisen Show, and play some of the audio from camp and things like that. This suits me at this stage of my life, so I'm perfectly fine to stay here in the 9 to 11 spot. And we're going to continue with the morning show on Sportsmanlike, which we run from 6 to 9. But here's where the changes come in. Instead of Tony coming on at 11 o'clock, as he has for, I guess, the last 4 years, when we started the station 5 years ago, he was on at noon. We moved it to 11 o'clock when changes were made. And so it has been 11 o'clock for some time. But now Bram Weinstein is going to do his show from 11 to 12. We're still going to run Greenberg from 12 to 2. But Tony is going to be 2 to 3. 2 to 3 o'clock. He does that 3 days a week. So we're going to have Tony still on ESPN 630. But if you've been used to hearing him at 11 o'clock, he now moves to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then Mike Callow, who has worked here in many roles, including program director, is going to host the show called The Line Change, which will be on from 3 to 5. That's the spot that Bram Weinstein has been in for a while. So Mike is going to take that over from 3 to 5. And then from 5 to 5:30, we're going to have what we call today's soundbite. So kind of the best of the station during the day. That'll be 5 to 5:30. And Bram, who has been the voice of the Commanders for the last 4 years and is heading into his 5th year, will do Commanders Daily from 5:30 to 6 every day. And then the ESPN night shows, Freddie and Harry and Amber and Ian, which go till 10 o'clock, and the other programming that ESPN has. So, we're in an era where radio is definitely changing, and certainly AM radio, and more of the consumption is done by podcast after the shows are over. So where a show fits now isn't as crucial as it used to be. And you'll still get the great programming that we've been giving you for a while. The same people like me and Bram and Mike Callow. It just shuffled around a little bit, except for me. So I'm staying in the 9 to 11 spot, and very happy to be here and hope to stay here for a while. We'll see how that goes. Yeah, I mentioned the implosion last night that the Nats had. Got off to a great start at Arizona. They had a 5-0 lead in the first inning. They extended that to 6-0. Diamondbacks cut it to 6-2, scoring a run in the fourth and the fifth inning. But the Nats had two more in the sixth inning. They're up 8-2. Seventh inning, 98.9% chance that they win the game. Their closer made the All-Star team, Kyle Finnegan. He comes into the game in the ninth inning. They have a 4-run lead. And the Diamondbacks are able to cut that now to an 8-7 lead when Corbin Carroll, who's been on the bench all night, comes in to pinch hit with one out in the bottom of the ninth. And sure enough, hits a 2-run homer, and the Diamondbacks win the game 9-8. Finnegan could still be traded. You know, it's his fifth blown save of the year, but pitching is hard to find, and bullpen help is certainly something that you need, and especially in the postseason where the hook is quick, you need as many pitchers as you can possibly have. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's traded today, but whoever's making the deal with Mike Rizzo is probably on the phone now saying, Mike, I found some dings in the undercarriage here. Or the house inspection showed that there's some leaks and some termite damage. You're going to have to give me a break on the price here. So we'll see how that all unfolds. But again, they're out of it. Going into last night, they were 6.5 out of the wild card. I don't know what it is now, but at this point, it's kind of ridiculous to think about postseason. And a sign of that yesterday was that they traded Lane Thomas, hitting .253, 8 homers, 28 stolen bases. You've heard Tony say this many times, that he's the best player on the team, or was the best player on the team now. And he goes to the Cleveland Indians for 3 prospects. How good will these prospects be? We don't know. But I trust Mike Rizzo's judgment on prospects. He's done pretty well with that. And this is a team that is looking towards next year. You're seeing some of the pieces come up and prosper. C.J. Abrams is a bona fide all-star now. James Wood looks like he's going to be a great player here, maybe for a long, long time. He is an incredible athlete and just seems to get better and better. So, things are coming around for them. Keibert Ruiz has struggled at times, but he's here on a long-term contract making decent money, and you got to have a solid catcher. There are some pieces here. And the hope is that the prospects come up and continue to become like Wood and Abrams, and maybe next year or the year after, they got a team that will maybe not contend to win the championship, but will be a playoff team, and we'll see how far. And again, when they won the World Series in 2019, remember this, they were 19-31. They got into the playoffs, but it was as a wild card, and in those days, it was a one-and-done situation. And they were trailing the Milwaukee Brewers in that one wild card game, the winner-take-all. And Josh Hader, the unhittable closer, was in. And thanks to the Juan Soto double, they were able to win that game and go on. The momentum from that carried them through the series, and they won it in 7 games against the Astros. So you never know how that's going to go. But I would say this, that I would think that Kyle Finnegan will be traded, and whoever's taking him on will overlook the disaster of last night. All right, Commanders back in Prads today, which, for someone my age is kind of an odd thing to think about, in that training camp used to be 2-a-days, and they would hit in both practices. The players would drag themselves in from the morning practice and have lunch, try and take a nap, get back on the field and hit again in the afternoon. And, those are the days when you would come to training camp to get in shape. Well, nowadays you're expected to be in shape all year round. And the hitting, they've discovered, has a cumulative effect on players and wears them down. And the idea is that they have limited the number of what they call padded practices. So yesterday was the first one that they had. They'll have another one, or are having another one right now in Ashburn. And this was what Dan Quinn said he was looking for as they finally put on the pads yesterday.
Really, the line of scrimmage is where the emphasis is. One, I want to make sure we're doing it correctly. Our leverage of how we're, entering into a block or taking on a block, the pass rush. So you hear, coaches and others say about pad level. And so you can get into some bad habits and lose leverage if you're not using your shoulders and your body to be in those spots. So getting into those positions, the combination on blocks. So for me, the emphasis is mostly the run game, both sides, and pass protection and pass rush.
He also said, and he had another news conference today before they went out on the field, that they spent a lot of time on tackling. And he said, in order to be a good defensive team, you got to be able to tackle. And they used Bobby Wagner as an example. You know, Wagner's been around a long time. He could be the second coming of London Fletcher, who came here about the same age and had like 4 or 5 good years for them. So that's a guy to keep an eye on. He's become a leader. I made this comparison. You have to be a really old school to remember this, but when Jack Pardee came in here as part of the Over the Hill gang in 1971, he was a guy that maybe didn't have all of his skills that he'd had earlier in his career, but he knew what the hell he was doing, and he was always in position and was calling the defensive signals, as Wagner is, and guys knew where they had to be. I remember Richie Pettibone in his first game as a Redskin had 3 interceptions against the St. Louis Cardinals because he was like Pardee, an old-time vet, knew where to go, knew where the ball was going, intercepted it 3 times against, I think it was Jim Hart, who was quarterbacking the Cardinals that day. The other thing that they're looking at as they hit in pads is you want to hit, but as he says, Quinn, not all the way.
This is a lot like sparring, you know, where you're in control and never out of control. So doesn't mean you're closer to the quarterback or ever on the ground. So those are the things that we do to protect one another, you know, contact that can be straight ahead as opposed to the side. So basically, Dave just put some rules of engagement in, and then from there. But if you're in front of somebody, we expect that thud to happen. But more than anything, I don't want to see what I have seen that I love is the effort and the finishing to go. So I want to make sure that stays high, you know, with the same, you know, contact element to it.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to do, you know. You like to see wild men out on the field making hits, but on the other hand, you know, you can't have anybody hurt this time of year, and you got to be careful with what you do. So it's kind of a fine line that they walk. Also worked on yesterday was changes on the offensive line, not necessarily in the starting lineup, but guys who can play multiple positions, such as they signed veteran Michael Dieter in the offseason. He's taken reps, as Nikki Javala reports today in the Post, taking reps at left guard, right guard, and center. Rookie tackle Brandon Coleman and veteran Cornelius Lucas have played on both sides. This becomes important as you have injuries. You know, sometimes a guy will get hurt, and his replacement won't necessarily come from the bench. They'll shift somebody over. Somebody else will come in and say, play right guard, and the right guard will move to center and things like that. You got to have versatility. Ron Rivera used to talk about this all the time. Not that, you know, the 4-win season last year was a great example of how well this works, but you're going to have injuries. It's a 17-game season, and you got to have guys, as Dan Quinn says, play multiple positions.
Putting people at different positions, this is the time to explore some of that. Right tackle, left tackle, who's going to be into those spots, who may be a swing. We also do it, most of the guards can play center, and just about all of the centers can play guard. So it's not just a one hole, you know, backup or spot. So, like, for instance, you saw Dieter playing left guard, right guard, center. You've seen that with Nick to move at 2 spots, Brandon Coleman and others, Luke, to go into 2 spots. So it's worth it now to do those positions because you're exploring, you're finding out more information. Then you later get locked into one spot.
Yeah, and the last thing from yesterday's news conference is the kickoff. And, yeah, it's going to be on Thursday night. We got the first, the Hall of Fame game is going to be played. I think it's Cleveland and Chicago. And that will be the first look at what is going to be a very odd look, as they have the kickoff where the two teams have their players lined up 5 yards apart at midfield. The kicker is back at the 40, and then you have 2 return men at the end zone line. And it's going to be, you know, I think, of all the changes that have been made in NFL rules over the years, this is the one that you're going to look at and go, whoa, because, you know, the others you don't necessarily recognize. They've tweaked a lot of things over the years, and they've tweaked it in a way that there's more offense in the game, which is good. But this is supposedly a safety move. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but what they did last year was essentially take the kickoff out of the game, like in the Super Bowl. What do we have, like 13 kickoffs, and none of them were returned. They want to get the kickoff back in the game. They want to keep it safe, but it's very complicated how they're doing it. And it may be so complicated that it's going to take a long time for them to adjust. And Quinn was asked yesterday, do his players have a full understanding of how the new kickoff rules work?
In the big picture, yes. How does some of the other ones go where you had to think about, okay, how do you do it if, the wind blows the ball off the tee and there's no one back there? Like, those are ones that you had to think about to say what would happen on that play. And so some of the rules that may have been added, not added on a rule, but like amendments that you say to, okay, what are those things? So knowing after a penalty, what does that kick look like when you have to go back to the 30 or kick off after a safety where, you're kicking off from the 50. So like those ones aren't going to come up a lot, but when they do, you have to know what's the strategy then and how we're going to work through those. So I would say by and large, the big picture, yeah, people are understanding it. But the small nuances, I think, is still there.
He mentioned the wind blowing the ball off the tee. We talked about this yesterday. That's another wrinkle. You can actually have a 12th man on the field for that. If the ball gets knocked off the tee, you can bring somebody off the bench to hold for the kicker, but he's not allowed to be involved in the play. So he's either got to get off the field or make sure he doesn't get involved in the attempt to tackle. So there's going to be things that they're going to have to adjust to, and it's going to look strange for a while, but maybe sooner or later we'll get used to it. We'll see. Coming up, all this yak about quarterback contracts, Tua and Love signing deals that are record-breaking. Here's a quarterback in Jordan Love who has made 18 starts and is now the highest-paid player in NFL history, making like $10 million a year more than Patrick Mahomes. Crazy, isn't it? We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
I just reposted a tweet from Nikki Jabala. It's a picture of a fan out at training camp today. I think it's just season ticket holders who are there. And the fan is wearing a T-shirt which has the head of Terry McLaurin, minus helmet, photoshopped onto a suit, nice blue suit, blue tie, and the backdrop of the Oval Office, and it says Terry McLaurin 2024. I don't think 2024, but I wouldn't rule it out down the road. Her caption is incredible. I don't know how incredible that is. Having listened to most of his news conferences since he got here in 2019, he is definitely presidential. I don't know what his post-football plans are going to be, but whatever they are going to be, he's going to be successful. I know he's talked to Magic Johnson about being an entrepreneur. I would love to see him someday run for office. I think he's got real compassion for people, understanding of people. I think somewhere down the road, he's going to have some kind of career like that. Meantime, he's having a great NFL career. And maybe now he's finally got a quarterback as he heads into his sixth year. And maybe the last 4 or 5 years of his career are going to be a lot better than they were in the first. He's had great production, amazingly, with I think the count is like 13 different quarterbacks. So, yeah, a Terry McLaurin for president T-shirt, not as far-fetched as it might sound. Not in 2024, but maybe sometime down the line. Quarterback salaries. Whoa. When Patrick Mahomes signed that deal with guaranteed money and a possibility that it could reach $500 million, we said, oh, my God, they've gone. He's like the 12th or 13th highest paid quarterback now. He's making $45 million a year. Yesterday, there was the announcement of the quarterback contracts for Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love, who's made 18 starts, that put them in the neighborhood of $55 million a year. Nuts, isn't it? Crazy. Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon on that yesterday on PTI.
You don't think had anything to do with this, and you protect your players at all costs,
important.
Particularly
That's
if
an
they had
important
nothing
concept.
to do with it.
Small piece on this.
You know,
The reason I think
They'll
it's
transition
harsh
to the quarterback
is in
somewhere.
comparison, for example, to the Chinese swimmers from the previous Olympics, where it was reported that they tested positive and they didn't lose their medals. And we don't know about both will receive over $50 million a year. Love's 25 years old, Tua is 26. Neither has gotten past the second round of the playoffs. Well, on which quarterback is in a better position to succeed?
well, I think right now, Tony, if you're talking about succeed and the way sports go now, even all these glamorous quarterbacks who make $1 trillion, a lot of them seem to have 3 or 4 year windows. And then you go, wait a minute, what do you mean Carson Wentz is like a third string quarterback somewhere? Wasn't he on a Super Bowl winner? That's what happens to even some of the best quarterbacks. Not 15 in Kansas City, not Tom Brady, not a few others.
Him.
But I don't know. I'm going to go short term, right? So I'm going to go Tua.
Right.
And I'm going to look at Tua because he's got an offensive array of characters out there that seem at his disposal to threaten at least to win now, even though that division can be pretty tough. If you believe that your Jets, if I listen to my dear friend Mike Greenberg every day, are inked into a Super Bowl spot, we know Buffalo is really good. That division's tough. Although Jordan Love is in a tough division, we know now. Because look, the Vikings are going to be better. The Bears better be better. And Detroit's already good. So they're both in tough situations. They're making $1 trillion on forecasting. This is like, crop forecasting. What's the orange crop going to be like come spring, come harvest? Yeah. All of them are overrated and overpaid in the moment. But I'm going to go with Miami, and that maybe is hoping because I don't want Jordan Love to be as good as he looked for a 10-game stretch.
I'm going to disagree with you pretty much right down the line. Automatically, I am going to say Jordan Love has better prospects because we know what Green Bay does with great quarterbacks. Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers won Super Bowls. That's in the recent history. Miami has no recent history like that. Miami hasn't had a great quarterback since Dan Marino. They haven't been in the Super Bowl since 1984. That's 40 years. They haven't won a playoff game since 2000. Let's compare all these divisions, right? I mean, you talk about Tua, that they got a rollover with New England. People think the Jets are going to be good. I don't think you ever bet on the Jets. Buffalo is good. But I disagree with you about Minnesota. I think without Cousins, they're going to retreat. I think Chicago may be better with Caleb Williams. They may be, but he's a rookie. And I think Detroit is good. So I think both of them enter the season sort of as wild card contenders.
That's Tony and Mike on the quarterback contracts. I apologize for the sloppy editing at the beginning, but you get the gist of it there. You got these two guys. One of them's been injured. The other one, not unproven, but, the body of work not that big, and they're getting that kind of money. Kevin Clark, who does the football podcast on ESPN and is on a variety of shows, including Around the Horn, was on yesterday on Unsportsmanlike looking at the two contracts, specifically the one that Jordan Love got from the Packers.
I was surprised at how many people had the take he needs to justify this contract. He already did. He reached highs that very, very, very few quarterbacks reach in the NFL, which is being the best quarterback over a 10-week period, winning playoff games where it's hard to win playoff games. I guess Dallas isn't hard to win playoff games, but you get the point. Trevor Lawrence needs to justify his deal because he hasn't reached those highs. Tua needs to justify that because he hasn't reached those highs. And if he has, it's because of Mike McDaniel in most cases. So for me, this sample size is significant. And the way he processes, the way he reads pre-snap, the way he's developed in front of our eyes, the floor is really high. Matt LaFleur is a darn good coach. He's one of the best coaches in football. I'm not sure people fully appreciate that. Basically, until Aaron Rodgers last year there, he was the winningest coach in the history of football. And you don't do that on accident. If it was easy to win 13 games with Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy would have done it a lot more times than he ended up doing. And the infrastructure there, it's funny, we did a lot of comparisons between Jordan Love and Dak on Get Up. Well, the Packers don't have an owner, and they operate like it. The Cowboys have maybe the ultimate owner, the guy who wants to do press conferences, get involved, and make all these decisions. And that is reflected in their franchise. And the way the Packers operate is so smart, and it's going to set up Jordan Love for a really, really special run here. I'm not sure we fully appreciate what's coming, which in my opinion is probably a legitimate contender to Kansas City for the next few years.
So, for the record, I agree. I tend to agree. However, if you were asking me to bet $200 and whatever it is million on it, would I be willing to do that? That's the question, Hembo, because the sample size, as impressive as it was, is small. What do you think?
I think that he's been in their building since 2020, so we only have a little bit of data, but they have 4 years of what this guy practices like, how he processes information, how he watches film, how he surrounds himself with people and information and all the things. They have all the information. If the Packers, one of the best and shrewdest organizations in pro football, are willing to give him that contract, especially when they did, who am I to tell them that they're doing it a year too early? Who's to say that a year from now, Jordan Love wouldn't be $10 million a year more expensive? I actually think they did the right thing, despite the fact that we're only dealing in a 1 year sample size.
And he's that good. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason is he's going to be that good. If I told you right now, predict for me who's going to be the best quarterback in the NFC this year, who would you say?
I'd probably say Jordan Love. I mean, I think you can make a case that Kyle Shanahan helps Brock Purdy become that, but I think in a vacuum, first of all, it would be Love, and I think with Matt LaFleur, that gap exists, okay? And you mentioned, would I bet $212 million on it or $220 million? I'm building a bathroom in my house right now, which costs $220 million. But if I wasn't doing that, I would make this bet. I just think the market is the market. It's always going up. They know, as Hembo said, how he practices, how he operates, how he's developed, how he sees things pre-snap. The floor is there. And I just think that quarterback, what you're paying for is the tax to not find out how bad it can get without him, right? That's always, there's a FOMO element of it, right? I compare it either to Manhattan real estate or, investing in tech firms, 20 years ago. You just need to be involved. You need to get in the game, or else you're going to be sitting there saying, why didn't I get in on the ground floor? And that's how quarterback contracts have always worked. This is a much better bet than some of these contracts around the league. I mean, look how much Derek Carr is making.
Yeah. That's an example of one. Trevor Lawrence came up today. How about in Miami? What do you think of the deal? Yeah. What do you think of them making that decision? It's been heavily talked about. We went through all the stretch of time with all the injuries, the concussion concerns. There was a moment in time when I thought his career might be over. So there's a part of me that's incredibly happy for him. Good for the young man. He fought back from all of that. We all remember that awful night when he was lying on the field, and it really, just how terrible it looked. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't think this guy's ever going to play football. As it turns out, he wound up having a fully healthy season last year, a very good season, and now he gets his money. Did they get it right?
Probably. What I would have done, and maybe Chris Greer did this, the GM, is get Mike McDaniel in a room, close the door, get rid of all the recording devices, and say, how many guys could you do this with? Could you do this with Drew Lock? Could you do this with Daniel Jones became available? Could you do that? And then find out, because that's how you set the market. If Tua is uniquely equipped to run this offense, and you don't want to go with any other options, you don't want to play the draft game, you don't want to go with the free agency because it's always pretty bad unless you could free up money for Dak, which they couldn't do because they're so top-heavy with some of their stars there. If you're not going to do that, then yes, you're paying not to find out. I remember Thomas Dimitroff right after they made Matt Ryan, the Falcons made Matt Ryan the first $30 million quarterback. We were talking about it, and he said they were going back and forth, and do they go over the $30 million threshold? And one thing he thought about was he'd been in buildings before where quarterback was unsettled, and everybody in the building felt it. Secretaries, quality control people, they don't know if their future was going to they don't know if they're going to get their kids out of school the next year because quarterback is unsettled. And I think in a lot of places, they understand Tua can run this offense. He can probably, if the roster was good, make a Super Bowl. I think they're going to take a step back because of the pass rush losses this year, especially Christian Wilkins, who is a really, really, really good player. But I think in the next few years, they can build something special, and Tua can be that quarterback. I do not think with Mike McDaniel, Tua is preventing them from winning the Super Bowl.
He's not preventing them from winning the Super Bowl when he's making $9 million a year like he is this year. He might be making $50-some million like he's doing next year. The thing is, they didn't really manage this financially in a smart way, I don't think. Next year, it's the fourth highest cap hit in the league. The year after that, it's the fifth highest cap hit in the league. So it feels to me like this is a one-year shot at this thing because his cap hit is literally going up 5-6 times over the next couple seasons. You're not going to be able to see them retain the same kind of talent. Am I wrong?
Well, anybody with a lot of, first of all, anybody with a lot of top-heavy roster talent, as far as salaries go, is going to have to draft really well. You're going to have to play that game, okay? That's everybody. That's why the Rams won the Super Bowl, is because they were able to hit on third and fourth and fifth round picks when they were trading their first rounders for Matthew Stafford and those guys. So you're going to have to draft well, hit on those guys, because, again, you develop Christian Wilkins, he leaves. Van Ginkel, he leaves. That's always going to happen, a revolving door. So I think the salaries, we've almost gotten a little overrated. The cap is going to start spiking to an unprecedented degree. The TV money is going to be very, very real. I look at percentage of the cap. I'm okay with this deal, even if I think Tua, in a vacuum, if you didn't have Mike McDaniel, is probably not an amazing quarterback. That doesn't matter. He has an amazing coach. He has an amazing supporting cast. You're going to pay to now find out.
That's Kevin Clark from the This Is Football podcast with Greenberg yesterday. So we've covered the two high quarterbacks, the highly paid ones from yesterday, Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love. What happens if you look a level down? If you're not going to get into this $50 million plus per year deal, what kind of quarterbacks are you looking at? Here's Clark on that.
The year Ryan Fitzpatrick signed his Band-Aid deal with the Jets, remember he was late to camp and all that stuff, I want to get the numbers right, but I think he was the only quarterback making between like $10 and $25 million. There is no middle class of quarterback. It'd have to be a unique situation like a journeyman quarterback who's on a team that was ready to win that year. I mean, it seems like a million years ago, but that Jets team was primed for something. I think it'd be somebody like Tyrod Taylor. You can just go out and get a Drew Lock, somebody like that. I mean, Geno Smith is above that, way above that. I think a couple of years ago he was replacement level. If you just look at the market for him in the league, came in as a guy fighting for a job. But I think that's the best case scenario for a replacement guy. He kind of evolves into a real deal starter. I just think it's really hard to find those replacement guys. And I think Tyrod Taylor is probably the level we're talking about if we're saying, hey, we can go get this guy right now.
Okay, let's just – are you good with that?
Yeah, there are only two quarterbacks making between 15 and 35, and they're Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield.
There we go.
Okay.
There's your
Baker Mayfield.
There's your Sam Darnold, yeah.
He was available for a ham sandwich, right? Anyone could have had Baker Mayfield. Nobody wanted him. The world had given up on him. He went down to Tampa. He had a great year, right? I mean, Baker Mayfield, objectively, had an outstanding season last season. So my point would be, are you better off, I'm going to use a word here that not everyone might not agree with, but in some cases, way overpaying, decimating your salary cap in the way you just pointed out, Hembo, for a guy who's good? Or are you better off taking a shot and trying to find someone I can pay $20 million like Tyrod Taylor or Baker Mayfield who might play just fine?
But here's the problem. We're looking backwards on Baker Mayfield, okay? You might not hit. If you were taking a flyer right now on a failed first-round pick, like Baker Mayfield was with Cleveland, he obviously had his highs, but you're looking at Mac Jones. You're looking at Zach Wilson. If you wanted to, I mean, isn't Sam Darnold making $10 million this year? The market for those guys is actually much higher than maybe they should be. And so I think it's hard. I think taking a flyer on a guy like Baker Mayfield and saying this is going to be our answer, it's very, very risky when we have Super Bowl aspirations. You cannot put a price on Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and that offensive line and some of those guys, Jalen Phillips, if he's healthy, a lot of those stars on the defense, looking at the coach and the GM and saying, what are we doing? Why don't we have credibility at the quarterback position? And so I think that's an important part of this. In a year where you're trying to win, I don't think many teams are trying to win the Super Bowl. I think it's like 6 or 7 in a given year, and that changes depending on the organization, the quarterbacks, and all that stuff. I think the Dolphins over the next 3 or 4 years are trying to win the Super Bowl. You cannot roll the dice at quarterback when you're in that mode.
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. Now, you can go older. Matt Stafford has just had a contract adjustment with the Rams, but that puts him 14th among average salaries for quarterbacks. And as is pointed out in an SI.com story, there aren't 14 quarterbacks who played better than Stafford last season, and only Patrick Mahomes and Stafford have won a Super Bowl from that list. He's 36 years old. He's not 20-something, looking for another contract, so you can get that. It's also pointed out with the Packers and Dolphins and even the Jaguars, who just paid Trevor Lawrence $55 million, are they much better than, say, the Bucs with Baker Mayfield, who's making $33 million a year? And then, you have the ultimate bargain quarterback this year with San Francisco with Brock Purdy, where he's making about $1 million, but he's got only 1 year after this year because he was not a first-round pick. And so more than likely they're going to have to extend him after this season, especially if he has a really good year like he had last year, getting his team to a Super Bowl. And then who knows what the salary is going to be. Brock Purdy could be the first $60 million a year guy, which is outrageous considering he's Mr. Irrelevant, the last player taken. Just absolutely insane. Coming up, more yak from training camp, comments from Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, two veterans who've won Super Bowls and are providing leadership for the Commanders. And also, I have watched the Pete Rose documentary, and I'll have some thoughts on that as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. I would say since the inception of sports radio, which came about 2 years before Pete Rose was banned for life for betting on baseball, that more hot air has been expelled on the air about the Pete Rose story than maybe any other story in sports. It's always been a summertime go-to. Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame? Let's take your calls. And it's been a never-ending conversation about that, which only really ramps up when they do documentaries from time to time, as they do now. There's a 4-part series, which I just watched on HBO, and I'll have some comments on it later this hour. I'll also play some of what Dan Patrick said on his show. Dan grew up in Cincinnati and was in college about the time that Rose went from the Reds to the Phillies. So I guess he saw the bulk of his career and did a lot of coverage of the Rose banishment, had Rose on his show, knows the story inside and out. And he watched, on his show when he commented on it, he watched the first 2 parts. There were 2 more parts. And, there's if you followed this, there's probably not a lot in there that you don't know. What you see is Pete Rose in winter. He's been fighting this battle now for 35 years. He was banned in August of 1989. I was there. Commissioner Bart Giamatti, who would die, I think, 6 days later of a heart attack at the young age of 51, said in banning Pete Rose, he has stained the game, and there has to be a punishment. And at the time, when Rose signed the agreement, he thought that he would not bet on baseball. He would sit out a year, and then they would reinstate him. And, I don't think that he necessarily had that agreement with Giamatti. Had Giamatti lived, I still don't think he would be back in the game. But ever since, it's all been about, should Pete Rose be back? And, I've done my time. Nobody loved baseball more than I did, yada, yada, yada. And now, there's a poignant scene at the end where he's having what's left of his hair colored. And it's just, he's just really a shell of the person that he was when he was one of the greatest players in baseball. So I have some more thoughts on the series coming up. But what you really get if you watch it, and it's about close to 4 hours. It's four parts, each of them about 50-some minutes. What you get is the picture of Pete Rose, who's now in his 80s, who's been fighting this battle the whole time, and it's just a pathological liar. Everything he says is not true, and all the things that he has denied over the years, they've got evidence that, come on, Pete, really, at some point, you should have come completely clean on this, and maybe they'd let you back into baseball. But as is said in the documentary a number of times, Pete's his worst enemy. That's really all the times that he could have crossed that barrier and found a way back into baseball and maybe made it to the Hall of Fame, maybe. Because he did break the cardinal rule of baseball, betting on baseball, that he could have done it and at least maybe would have been allowed to get back in the game. I mean, when he goes to a game, he has to buy a ticket. And there was even a part of it where his son got a cup of coffee with the Reds wearing number 14, and he's sitting in the stands watching him. Wasn't even allowed to go in the clubhouse and pat him on the back. One of the most legendary figures, maybe the most legendary figure in the history of the Reds, if you just took his playing career, never mind all the Michigas that goes along with it, and he wasn't allowed to do that. So we'll get to that. Quarterback story, and there are all kinds of quarterback stories. Spent a lot of time in the last hour talking about the contract extensions for Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love and how they've busted through barriers that we thought were insane, like when Patrick Mahomes signed his deal. Mahomes is making $10 million a year less. Back-to-back Super Bowl champion, MVP, the greatest in the game right now, and the salaries have just gone nuts, and they're going to go nuts again. You notice these guys are signing short-term deals because they can reopen the contract, the NFL can, open the contract with the networks in 2029, and they will because the money has just exploded. If the NBA has got deals of $75 billion and the NFL has got a paltry $100 billion, you watch. They're going to maybe double that or come close to it anyway, depending on what the economics of the country and everything are at that point. But the way things are going with streaming and the Amazon money and Peacock and all the other stuff, there will be massive deals made. And the way it works, of course, with the salary cap is as revenue goes up for the league, so does the cap. There's more money to spend. And if you can get one of those rare gems, a quarterback, you're going to pay for it. There's only one, though, that has a fully guaranteed deal. With all the money that they're getting and all the signing bonus and the whole thing, there's only one who has a fully guaranteed contract, which was $270 million when he signed it, and that is Deshaun Watson of the Cleveland Browns. The first year, he was suspended for 11 games of that season because of the harassment of the masseuses, I guess. And so he played, 6 games that year? And then last year he got hurt, and Joe Flacco was the one that led Cleveland to the playoffs, which showed you really what a great team that Watson had around him, that they were good enough to get there with Joe Flacco. Flacco played pretty well, but, he had a team that was capable of winning a Super Bowl. And so yesterday he was asked a simple question at a news conference as he gets ready for his third season with the Cleveland Browns. And he was asked what's changed entering this season as opposed to the previous two. And his answer was, honestly, it's really just blocking out all the bull bleep outside. Stuff coming in 2 years, different environment, different team, different all that. So you come in and your character is being mentioned this way, and it's kind of a flip on you, and you're trying to get people to like you or improve, but now it's like at the end of the day, it's 2 years, and if you don't like me, you have your own opinion. It is what it is. Blocking out all the noise and focusing on me, focusing on what I need to be, the best Deshaun Watson I can be for myself and my family and my teammates. And he said, so Mike Freeman, who wrote about this in USA Today, says, it's like someone punching themselves in the face and then saying, I'm going to block out all the pain of a self-inflicted broken nose and focus on me, the person who punched himself in the face first. More than 24 women have accused Watson of sexual assault and inappropriate conduct during massage sessions, and that's what led to the suspension for 11 games. Then they followed up. They asked him, well, what's it been like to block out the noise? And he says, of course, my character is being challenged. Like I said, I know who I am. A lot of people have really knew my history or knew who I really was. So they're going to be, they're going based on other people's opinions and what other people are saying. I'm the person that likes to have people like me. And I feel like a lot of people are like that. So sometimes things in your brain, you just got to churn and you just got to be like, forget it. It is what it is. And as Freeman writes, Mike Freeman, USA Today, says what's clear is that as time passes, Watson is starting to feel more and more comfortable talking about that moment and these comments that show him in a way trying to rewrite history. But he can't. We all know what Watson is accused of and how many women made those accusations. So as much as he wants to talk about, blocking out the bull bleep and the noise is what he created. And again, more than 24 women accusing him of sexual assault and inappropriate contact, and he settled with, I think, all of them financially, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe one or two didn't. But the NFL found that there was enough there, even though he was not convicted in court with the settlements. They found enough there to suspend him for 11 games. And on top of that, the way the Browns structured the contract, he was only making $1 million in that first year, $1 million of the 270. So the rest of it he gets over the course of the rest of the deal, and it's all fully guaranteed. So I'm sure he gets it, but he's never going to admit it, and he's never going to apologize, it appears. He's just going to keep being Deshaun Watson, and if he wins games for the Cleveland Browns, there'll be a certain percentage of the fan base that will say, okay, all right, well, that's good enough. All right. Let's get to some of the comments yesterday. The two very interesting veterans on this roster picked up as free agents. One of them, Bobby Wagner, who won a Super Bowl with Seattle, is going to be a Hall of Fame player. And Zach Ertz, I don't know if he's a Hall of Famer, but he had great years in Philadelphia. He was part of a Super Bowl team there. And probably just as important as why he's here, spent some time with Cliff Kingsbury playing for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think Kingsbury wanted his veteran presence here, his leadership. And both of them spoke yesterday quite eloquently about their experience and what they expect to bring to the Commanders, both of them being greeted, I guess, as leaders. And certainly Bobby Wagner is one of them. In fact, today Dan Quinn talked about how they use Wagner as an example of how to be a tackler. I mean, that was the London Fletcher thing. London Fletcher was a tackling machine. Bobby Wagner is even more, I think, more than that, in that he is a guy who's going to call the defensive signals. I don't think Fletcher did, and really has become a leader on this team. And he was asked yesterday about the reunion with Dan Quinn, who was his defensive coordinator when Seattle won a Super Bowl. Quinn, of course, went off to the Atlanta Falcons, led them to a Super Bowl, lost his job, and now kind of like a bookending. He was there for the beginning of Bobby Wagner, and now what probably will be the last few years of Wagner's career. Here was Wagner on the reunion with Quinn.
Overall, it's been great. Being back with DQ has been amazing. I think the biggest thing is being back with Coach Norton. He's made those film studies so fun. The motivation, the joking. Obviously, you've been around a guy that knows you very, very well, and so he tells a lot of the older stories to the younger guys about how what I was like when I first got into the league, and I think our point of view on it is a little bit different.
Yeah, Ken Norton Jr. He's emerging as a very prominent figure on this defense, and he's a guy who's a winner, man. He won, I think he won 3 straight Super Bowls, jumping from the Cowboys after they won their first 2 to the 49ers, and he is obviously quite a presence, and has been a linebackers coach for a long, long time. He may ultimately emerge like a Joe Bugle kind of a guy. I really haven't heard any news conferences with him. Maybe they'll have him up there for some of them, but a lot of guys are talking about the effect that Ken Norton Jr. is having on that, what they call now the linebacker room. This is more from Wagner, and it's on the identity that he's hoping to help establish here in Washington.
I think as far as a team, you want to figure out who are you going to be, and it's more so like setting a standard and understanding what you're going to bring to the table every single day, because once that standard's set, you have to live up to that. And so you have days where you may not hit that mark, and you should have the people around you, tell you the truth and raise your level, and everybody should raise their level. As far as linebackers, we're the generals, the ones that everybody's looking at for the play call. We're setting everybody up, we're getting everybody lined up, and we got to take pride in that, being leaders, being the voice, and being an extension of the coaches, and, controlling the middle and making plays and having fun and bringing everybody together. I think we are in the middle for a reason, and, things in the middle keep everything together. So that's kind of the identity that we start to form, not just with myself, but everybody that plays the linebacker position.
Current roster, as well as some of the new players, all mention your name as a leader on this team, for the most part. I can't say I talk to everybody, but for the most part. How does that make you feel that you are new here, but you are already being mentioned as one of the players that they're learning a lot from, and you're a leader on this team?
Man, I think it's a blessing. I think, I was blessed to be around a bunch of great men, great leaders. And, as you get older, you have so many scars over your career. And something that you can't do when you're young is get that experience without having it. But if you have an older guy that can share their scars, you can kind of expedite your learning. And so that's what would help me in my journey. And so I feel like I just try to do the same. There was a lot of people that helped me while I was coming up. Like I said, linebackers like Ray Lewis, London Fletcher was gracious with their time. And so I try to do the same and give back and try to, share my experience and scars with anybody who has, thirst for knowledge.
Yeah, they seem to have a lot of reverence for Bobby Wagner. And I continue to make the Jack Pardee comparison. When Pardee came here as part of the over-the-hill gang from the Rams, when George Allen took over, led the defense. They got to the playoffs in the first year and the Super Bowl in the second year. Now, a lot of people have the image. It's a famous photo from the Super Bowl loss to Miami where he's trying to bring down Larry Zonka. And maybe he was a little bit over the hill at that point, and that turned out to be his last game in the NFL. But I thought from a leadership standpoint and the way he led the defense, he was vitally important here, Jack Pardee, the 2 years he spent in Washington. As a matter of fact, I was on the committee to select the 70 greatest Redskins of all time in 2002, and I wanted to put Pardee on the team, even though he only played 2 years in Washington. And I didn't get enough support for that. But I would have liked to have seen him on that team. I thought he was that important to those first 2 teams that George Allen had, and I would hope that Bobby Wagner could have that same kind of effect on the Washington defense. A couple of things from Zach Ertz, who was he was kind of out of football last year. He was released by the Cardinals. He actually signed with the Lions, and had they made the Super Bowl, he would have played in the Super Bowl. But they did not, and he became a free agent and signed here in Washington. And now on the other side of 30, he's been in the league for a dozen years. He talked about how experience has helped him as maybe his physical skills have dropped just a little bit.
At this point in my career, there's really not a coverage that I haven't seen. And so when I was young, the game is a lot faster than it is now. You feel like the guys are moving a lot faster than they are now. But I'm also able to play almost a step ahead or 2 steps ahead because I understand what the defense is trying to do. So if they're playing a certain coverage, I want to attack where they're vulnerable. And maybe when I was younger, it took me a few steps into the route to really see what they were going to do on a certain play. But now I can pretty much understand what they're trying to do pre-snap. So I'm almost 2 steps ahead than when I was younger because I had to react versus now I can anticipate. And obviously the red zone is some red zone third down, game on the line are situations that I've always wanted to excel in. I feel like I've done that throughout my career, and it comes with a lot of trust from the coaches and the quarterbacks. But I take a lot of pride in that area as well.
So that's Ertz on where he is at this point in his career. One of the hand-picked guys to come here by Cliff Kingsbury, who coached him in Arizona. And here's his view of what he's seen from Kingsbury so far as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen Cliff so happy. He seems like he's refreshed. Every time he goes out to the practice field, he's eager. He's excited to work with the quarterbacks every single day. He's putting them through individual every single day. And so I truly believe that maybe that break from everything last year and him able to get this job and work with Jaden and Marcus and Sam and Jeff every day has really almost rejuvenated him. And I think I'm in the same boat. It's been extremely fun to be here. I feel almost like I've gotten younger since I got out here just because how much fun I'm having every day. And so I think Cliff and I are kind of in the same boat in that regard.
Reporters who've covered Kingsbury have said that he seems more comfortable as a coordinator than a head coach. The other things that went along with being a head coach, dealing with the media, and I've seen his news conference. I think he's done a couple of them, not anything special. And the other administrative things that go along with being a head coach were not really for him. And he thrived more as a guy who's watching the cut-ups, watching the tape, designing plays. There's just certain guys like that. I don't think Richie Pettibone ever got a good opportunity to become a head coach. It was a bad transitionary period when he got his 1 year here in 1993, and he was fired and never coached again. I wonder in the right situation how he would have done. But as a defensive coordinator, he was brilliant. He had his guys in the right spot all the time. I mean, he would make halftime adjustments. So if Ertz can be that kind of a guy, Richie was never a head coach before he became the defensive coordinator here, but Ertz has been both a coordinator and a head coach, and it may be just that coordinator fits him better. And maybe Dan Quinn can run the same kind of thing that Joe Gibbs did, where Gibbs ran the offense and he left the defense up to Richie. Dan Quinn, a defensive guy, defensive coordinator in the past with Seattle last year and the last couple of years in Dallas, that he runs the defense and leaves the offense pretty much up to Kingsbury. He said, Quinn has said he's not going to call the defensive signals. He's going to be involved in all phases of the game, which is the way you want it for a head coach. So, again, we will see. We're still in July. We haven't hit August yet, but all signs pointing in the right direction, including the owner. The owner's out there today as Josh Harris is greeting. I guess it's mostly season ticket holders out there today, but he's out there on the field, glad handing and saying hello to everybody, taking pictures and that kind of stuff. Anyway, that does it for me. Not Tony next. It's the Bram Weinstein Show. I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.